everyone, welcome to the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show, live on Rumble, where facts come first and where news is done right. And today we continue to follow the fallout from the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. A new report sheds light on the directors of the bank and their lack of credentials. That's coming up next. And host of the Rubin Report, our great friend Dave Rubin, he will be here as well to talk about the continued failures of big blue states like California and how the California dream has morphed into a Golden State nightmare. And that's where we lead off tonight with a close look at the failed far left agenda and the push by Democrats to bring the disasters from the left coast to the rest of the country. And it's your backyard. For decades, California was a beacon of hope and prosperity for the rest of the nation. It's been the home for titans of industry and entertainment, technology, and business. But now, California is losing its population at an alarming rate. And for the first time ever, California is on track to lose population for a third straight year. Costs are up, crime is up, and quality of life is down, all under the leadership of one-party Democrat rule in Sacramento and under the reign of Governor Gavin Newsom. Last year, the net migration out of California was over 300,000 people. Hardworking, middle-class families are saying goodbye to the palm trees, to the weather, to the lifestyle, because it's become too expensive, too unsafe, and too unbearable. Now, across the state, homelessness has spiraled completely out of control. Just look at this recent report on the homeless population plaguing Los Angeles and the RVs. Take a look.
Streets for miles are more than 500 homeless RVs. This is LA, but looks more like a third world country. A small part of the area is Harbor Gateway, unknown to most, that shares zip codes with Gardena and Torrance. The large majority of these RVs are parked in unincorporated LA County, bleeding into East Gardena, West Rancho Dominguez, Compton, and Willowbrook.
But meanwhile, far left figures like Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon continue to coddle criminals and let lawlessness run loose. And in Sacramento, elected leaders refuse to stand up to the most far left progressive voices to say, enough is enough. For example, California accounts for around 30% of the country's homeless, but makes up just 12% of the population. Literacy rates in public schools continue to rank near the bottom of the national average, and cost of housing is 96% higher than the national average, if you can even imagine that. And don't forget about the failed energy policy, which means rolling blackouts and brownouts are in danger of becoming the new norm. And look at this. A new report from the LA Times chronicles the rampant drug use on LA's metro system, prompting commuters to flee in droves. In fact, just since January, 22 people have died on metro buses and trains from suspected overdoses. It all raises the question, can California ever be golden again, where people and property can be protected for every family? Homelessness has to get under control, and where common sense Americans can afford to live. Sadly, the prospects aren't looking good as leaders continue to double down on the same pandemic issues instead of focusing on the issues that matter most. For example, after Governor Newsom touted a record $97.5 billion surplus back in May, reality is telling a very different story, because the state is now facing a projected budget deficit of a whopping $22.5 billion. And rather than rein in the spending, the California Reparations Task Force is trying and trudging ahead on a whole new proposal to dish out around $360,000 to nearly 2 million Black Californians. at a cost of $640 billion. You can't make this up. And just last week, California Secretary of State Shirley Weber said, quote, if California can admit its sins and change the narrative, then there is a way forward for states and cities across the nation. Now ask yourself, does that sound like a person seriously committed to improving the lives for everyday Californians? No, it does not. You want to help those who need it most, restore order, rein in costs, and remove the homeless from the street. But it doesn't stop there, as we are now learning that Governor Newsom reportedly lobbied the White House and the Treasury Department to rescue depositions of Silicon Valley banks, but didn't disclose that his private wineries were also the bank's clients. It's one big California cabal where the rich and powerful are treated one way while working people are treated another. Now, of course, this is all why so many Californians have sought refuge elsewhere. Remember, Americans don't just vote at the ballot box. They vote with their feet and with their dollars and wallets. But what we are seeing play out in California is what Joe Biden wants for the rest of the country. We're going to sort this out because joining me now, he is the fantastic host of the Rubin Report here on Rumble, Dave Rubin. All right. Dave, thank you for being there with me.
I'm happy to be with you, Kimberly, and most important, former Californian, current Floridian.
I mean, exactly, right? It's pretty interesting. I think you and I both have a lot to say about this subject matter, but you can't make it up. It's unbelievable. So I want to talk to you about this because you've been a big voice about this and just showing the juxtaposition and the contrast. You know, I want to get kind of your reaction to all that chaos surrounding the Silicon Valley Bank. And we're now learning, as I mentioned, that Governor Newsom was a client of the bank while at the same time pressing Biden officials to save depositors. What's your reaction?
Well, Kimberly, I guess we're both sort of exes of Gavin Newsom one way or another, because I feel like I left him too. It was
That's
very
how
personal.
rumors get started. Yeah, okay. True story though, but yeah.
Yeah, it felt very personal when I was leaving California. But on the Silicon Valley Bank situation, look, I think you can make interesting philosophical arguments either way in terms of bailing out the banks or not. On one hand, if you don't bail out the banks, then you feel there's a sense that there will be this systemic failure, and you don't want all of the employees of the businesses who had their money there to not get checks when you're talking about just engineers who happen to have worked at a tech company or something else. On the other hand, if we don't let these things fail, then we're just, in essence, making one big bank, which is the United States government, right? I mean, there's a reason that when you go to the bank that on the little glass panel there's the golden FDIC thing that says you're insured for 250 grand, because it's supposed to be 250 grand and that's it. But, you know, we live in a postmodern world where there are no truths and there are no rules, so we just endlessly keep putting Band-Aids on big problems. But I would say this is pretty also consistent with everything else happening in the country right now, where we're all participating in something that we know is very broken. There's very few people doing anything about it at the federal level, I would say. And to relate it to the rest of your monologue, there are places where it is working. Right. I would say it's working in Florida, it's working in Texas, it's working in some of the other red states who are figuring out how to budget properly, how to govern properly, and then they don't have not just the massive banking problems or financial problems that California has, but then they also have law and order, they also have safety, they have employment, et cetera, et cetera. So these things are actually connected to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's just sad, you know, I mean, I used to think, you know, California was it, right? Fabulous place to live, jobs, opportunities, great neighbors, great schools, and it's just shocking to me. You know, and I was First Lady of San Francisco, you know, we had it going well. You know, I was in the DA's office and fighting crime, prosecuting cases, dealing with quality of life issues, and very proactive. And it's frightening and astonishing, quite frankly, to see how far it's changed, how quickly, to the point like there is a mass exodus. I don't think you could, some of the people I know, you couldn't pay them to live in California. because it's totally crazy.
Kimberly, you mentioned 300,000 people left last year, but it's over 1 million people since COVID. Now, think about that. It's 1 million people, but it's not just people who leave. They take businesses with them. They take resources with them. They take the tax money that California wants so badly, and then they bring that stuff, that good stuff, they bring it to other places. Myself, I brought 2 companies from California to Florida that are now flourishing. Locals, which is now obviously part of Rumble, and the production company that produces my show. Yeah, there you go. And think about that. It's not just even the companies and the money. It's all my employees who are in this room right now, who are good, decent citizens, who are now flourishing in the free state of Florida. So it becomes multi-pronged, because the further the states divide, the more that you get this movement from one state to another, and the more that exacerbates the divide. So it's all, it's sort of like, you could look at New York as a version of this too. Lee Zeldin only lost by, I think it was about 400,000 votes, right? And New York is obviously a heavily blue state. Now, about 450,000 people have left New York since COVID. So if you look at the numbers, it's like, man, these things could have been a lot more purple or whatever you want to call it. But the more that the blue states go that big government direction, the more red states will go the other direction. That divide is just going to continue, which, by the way, I mean, that's what federalism is all about. I don't think it's a terrible thing to a certain extent, but I don't know what makes us united anymore, because frankly, last time I was in San Francisco, you may have seen the videos on Twitter. I mean, it looks like a zombie apocalypse there.
Scary, right? It's like Will Smith, I Am Legend, zombies all over the place. I mean, it's frightening. No one wants to go there.
Kimberly, I lived in New York City my entire adult life until I moved to LA in 2013. So for about 15 years of my adult life, I lived in New York City. Never once did I ever feel afraid walking around in New York City. And I'd be up all night long, and I was doing stand-up. I was in shady areas and in crappy clubs. Never felt unsafe. San Francisco, I was there for 2 days. I was meeting with Elon at Twitter, so it's not as if I'm in the worst area of San Francisco. What was shocking wasn't just the amount of homeless people and the amount of drugs, but usually you think of it as it's contained to, say, 2 or 3 blocks, like Skid Row in LA, which that's where it used to be contained. And as you know, it's everywhere in LA now. But in San Francisco, it was sprawling. I mean, it was absolutely everywhere. And what that does is, you're in Florida just as I am. Everyone here's smiling all the time. That's one of the things that I'm totally amazed about.
Just to make the point, I'm in my Florida yellow.
Well, like, because
we're the new Sunshine State, not those guys.
Right. Well, exactly. You go to Target, you go to Whole Foods. There's a sense of life here. People are doing what they want to be doing. They're working. They're productive. There's a joy that comes with that. Versus San Francisco, where quite literally everybody was either homeless people or people that sort of were just looking over their shoulder, like, oh man, I could be mauled, or I'm going to step in human feces or something.
Literally.
And that just degrades things over time. Yeah, literally.
Yeah, because that's the new public toilet for everyone, which is just the sidewalk. You have that. You've got these, quote, safe injection sites. Like, come on, let's just, let's help you out with your addiction. Like, it's insane. The whole thing, the way they're doing it, it does not work. It's affected crime, all of the above. It affects people's, value of their homes. I mean, people
Could you have ever imagined?
Yeah.
Could you have ever imagined? I mean, as you said, you lived there, you were first lady there. I mean, could you have ever imagined that it would be as bad as it is? Because it is I traveled the country. I finished up a book tour. I went from coast to coast. San Francisco was by far the worst. There were bad ones. LA's bad. One of the shocking ones for me was Denver. I was shocked how bad Denver was. But San Francisco is on another level. It did not feel like it was an American city.
Yeah, it's like crazy. It's like every day you walk out on the streets in California, it's like Squid Games. You're just wondering if you're going to get whacked. You know what I mean? You just never know. You're totally vulnerable.
The Squid Games, those guys had it better than some of these people.
No, that's true, by the way. So I want to go back a little bit to this Gavin Newsom issue. RX.
Yes.
Just saying. But, people have called me about this and texted. I was on Newsmax earlier about it. Here's the problem. It's a very obvious case where, why don't you disclose if you have, money in the bank, your wife does, etc., when you're sitting there actively pressing, as the reports go, the White House and the Treasury Department? It makes no sense to me. And full disclosure, because I'm a full disclosure kind of gal, I used to be an owner in Plumpjack, but then I sold it, okay? So I'm out of that. But, these are pretty obvious things, especially for somebody who wants to, run for president. Ethically speaking, if you're going to be lobbying against to the White House and to Treasury and you've got a vested interest, that needs to be put up front.
I mean, the thing is, he's a Democrat, and he has Democrat privilege. That's the one privilege that actually exists in the United States.
Yeah.
That really is it. He knows he can basically get away with anything, and they will keep, no matter how much destruction that wroughts, they will keep giving him promotions. He will keep getting better jobs. The media will keep fawning over him. Look, the simple truth is, from the day he started in San Francisco to the day he left and now where it is systematically gotten worse. There's just no doubt about it. California as a state, for a million reasons that some of them we've laid out already here, is significantly worse than when he took over. However, they just reelected him. So at some point, I think what happens to a lot of these guys is they kind of look around, they go, well, I'm still doing well and I'm having dinner at French Laundry and doing my thing. It doesn't really matter what the people think because for some odd reason they keep voting me in.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Look, I campaigned very hard for that recall. I was campaigning with Larry Elder.
Yeah, who's fabulous. I love Larry Elder.
Larry is a phenomenal human being, and California would be immeasurably better if he was governor instead of Gavin. But the simple truth is, it was not close in the recall, and then he won the re-election by a landslide. So Californians basically said to him, hey, Gavin, you can lock us in our houses, you can cause mayhem on the streets and not arrest people and all the masks, and you can do it, and guess what? We'll reward you for it. Thank you, sir. May I have another? So I don't blame him for not disclosing any information about his bank accounts or the winery's bank accounts, because he's going to get away with it either way.
I guess. I mean, that's what it seems like, right? It's the whole, rules apply to thee, but not to me. But you're right, So I guess he can celebrate that nothing will happen at French Laundry again. But what's also remarkable about this situation is that the New York Post reported that several of the directors had very little banking experience. And I know this isn't going to shock you, but they were like high woke credentials, high woke. And the board was dominated by, you guessed it, Democrats. So that's pathetic because you have to think about this. You have people that are putting their hard-earned dollars in these banks. This is why I tell people to investigate where you are investing. Because if you don't have the time or whatever, make it to figure out who exactly is in charge of your money. What are the policies and platforms and ideology? Because if you're going to have politicized banks doing that, trying to achieve their liberal agenda, they're going to go out of business, like Trump said. Go woke, go broke. Then you're going to lose your money, your 401k, your IRA that you worked very hard for. These are scary times when you see collapses like this.
Right. Well, look, in this case, they're not going to lose their 401ks and everything else because the government jumped in. Now, the problem, as I sort of said before, is that ultimately that means we have one bank, the United States government, and it will cause inflation to go up and we'll just keep printing money. And it will never matter what the banks do because we'll always save, quote unquote, save the banks. But putting that aside, the issue with the wokeness in the bank, they had a massive DEI department. They had a massive diversity, equity, and inclusion department, and they were more focused on how many lesbians do we have doing this and black people doing this and black lesbians doing that, rather than, did you know this, Kimberly? I don't know if you saw this, but it turns out they only had a chief risk officer for 3 months. I mean, that is the most important job at a bank, right?
How do you get away with that? I mean, they need to be penalized. I mean, it's just insane. There has to be some oversight. I just think it's so irresponsible because, people put out really their hard-earned money into these banks and these institutions that are just not worthy of it.
No, it's totally true. And look, I'm sympathetic to people that, if you put your money in that bank, we're all busy. So it's you think that a bank is just going to do the right thing, right? So, I get this bank was a particularly unique case because of Silicon Valley, because of the high risks related to tech companies, that and all the startups and all that, because startups, I know this from locals, you're not going to make money for the first couple of years, but you're going to put money in, you're going to raise investment with the hope of eventually raising money or getting acquired or whatever it might be. This bank was a particularly unique, risky case, but that's not an excuse for any of the things that they did. And by the way, it's also, let's not let the government off the hook here. This is because of Biden's economic policies that caused inflation to go crazy. These bonds then made no sense for the bank. So there's a lot of blame to go around here.
Yeah, and it's really true. And you know what bothers me the most is I see what's happening in California, and then I see what the Biden administration is doing, and it's freaking me out. I mean, they're out of control. They think California is the answer, and his new budget is a whopping $6.8 trillion, and it has all these little code words in it, like climate and equity and environmental justice. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. And they appear over and over again. And it seems like he's like, oh, let me just White House for Dummies. Let me follow the, cliff notes from those wackos in California. And we're going to take all that and we're going to bring it across the country. I mean, that's what it seems like.
Well, it's so strange because I like to think that I live in reality. And in reality, in my own life, when I set the budget for my family or for my business, I know that I don't want to spend more money than I bring in because I want to save a little bit of money each month. Maybe one day I'll retire or take a vacation or something.
Right.
But the government operates in a way that none of us could ever operate in. Even if you look at the ongoing fight now about the debt ceiling, which, we go through every couple of years. The debt ceiling, people don't understand. If you have a credit card and your credit card limit is $10,000, when you hit that $10,000, your credit card stops working. You can't just magically call somebody and demand more credit with no collateral for it or anything else. But the government, which spends tons of money it doesn't have, then we also send it to other countries, which is a whole other thing, about $160 billion to Ukraine. Strangely, we haven't been able to get much of that to the people of East Palestine. But then magically, it can also raise the debt ceiling. It can just say, yes, we'd like to borrow more. We don't have anybody. We're a debtor nation. And I guess the tough part about this is why Republicans usually lose, is because it's much harder to say to people, hey, we're going to have to cut back.
Right. Because
this thing ain't working. China may call in the debt one day.
So true.
And when we don't have any money to pay them, we're going to end up in a physical war because it becomes a mafia game at some point. The mafia, they want their money. And if you don't have it, then you better be willing to fight them. So we could end up in really some bad situations here. But it makes it much harder for Republicans because to stare at your constituents and say, no, I actually can't give you everything. And by the way, it's not me giving you everything. I'd be taking it from somebody else in the first place. That's much harder of a sell than to just be like, yeah, we're just going to keep printing money. We're going to save all the banks. We're going to give you all this stuff. Don't worry about it. Let's not think about it. We mostly care about race and gender and, trans issues and things like that.
Things like that. So, I mentioned earlier in my monologue, California is also moving ahead with this reparation agenda. And they're weighing this proposal that you know about, that to dole out about $360,000 per person to approximately 1.8 million Black Californians. This is real. This is what they intend to do when they are in a massive fiscal crisis and budget and going bankrupt. This is what they think is a good idea and necessary.
Let's pretend for a second that California had the money to do this. It's also in like a $20 billion deficit.
Monopoly money, yeah.
Right. Let's just pretend, though, that the money was there and that they were just looking to move extra money. Of course, now that's not true, but let's just pretend. Does anyone in their right mind think that if you give X amount of people 300-something grand each, or even $5 million each, that at the end they're going to be like, racism solved, we're good to go? No, it's going to perpetuate racism. First off, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are angry that they didn't get it, and how are you going to even verify that people were descendants of slaves and this and that? Are you going to give it to someone who moved here from, say, Senegal, who is incredibly successful as a first-generation immigrant, but happens to be Black? Should they get that money too? The litany of issues around this thing is so incredibly stupid. But more than anything else, the issue is they don't understand human psychology. Do you really think there will ever be a number that suddenly everybody, that all the grifters around race, that Ibram Kendi, and all of the 1619 Project people, they're all going to be like, okay, we signed off on it. Yeah. We all got paid out. We're good to go. Yeah. It never ends. It never ends.
It just encourages more. It's frustrating to me because, you read these headlines and these stories, you're like, wait, is this for real? Like, wait a second, I'm waiting for this to be like, just kidding. It's so irresponsible. I mean, I would not move to California, and I lived there and loved it for years. No way. If you gave me a free house and a great pool, I would be like, no, thank you. But, it's interesting because you tackle these issues head on all the time. And you had pretty notable back and forth this week with California Congressman Ted Lieu on these issues, including what does woke mean and the whole thing. So We want a little more of that, all right? So, give us essentially what went down with that and what is the left's woke agenda.
Well, it's funny. I have like a running list of who the worst people in the country are, and Adam Schiff's on that list.
So bad. Yeah.
Well, I think you'd agree with most of the people on my list. I've got Adam Schiff on there. I've got David Frum on there. I've got Adam Kinzinger on there. Liz Cheney. Just these people that are just nothing. They never accomplish anything. All they do is destroy things and then blame everyone else, often Donald Trump, for a lot of the things that they ended up doing themselves.
Yeah, it's like pin the tail on the Donald, right? There you go.
No, that's what it is. When I always see this, a guy like David Frum, for example, and then I'll tell you about Ted Lieu. David Frum wrote the Axis of Evil speech for George W. Bush that got us into the Iraq War. Millions of death, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, 20 some odd years later, we've wrecked part of the world. And he is the one who wrote the speech for it. He feels very guilty about that. So he always has to point to Donald Trump to make it seem like he's a good guy, because Trump's got to be worse than me. And you know what? When we had 4 years of Donald Trump, we had peace deals in the Middle East and all that stuff. I know you know about that. So look, on Ted Lieu, I find him to be one of the most dishonest, pandering politicians that we have. So he wrote out this tweet. The implication was that none of us know what woke is. And so I defined woke for him very quickly. I happened to be on Newsmax that day, so I basically said it. But what I would define it as, in the most simplest terms, is the belief in equity over equality with then a racial and or sexuality lens. So you believe in equal outcomes, that it's the government's job to rejigger things so that we all end up in the same place. And you use race and sexuality and gender as the sort of hammers to do that. That would be the simple way to explain it. Then once he got me going, then I just really continued to go off on him because, he has a very sordid past. He got tons of money from his friend Ed Buck, who was a rather wealthy white man who was drugging young black men, and I think at least one of them died. It might be two of them even, with meth and having crazy sex parties and all of this stuff. And he was a good buddy of Ted Lieu. And then really, I think the tweet that made the hardest hit with him was, I said, Ted, look, if you want to understand what woke is that one day your children, because he's Asian and his children are Asian, will be discriminated against when they're trying to get into school or get a job, but you'll have to shut up about it, because if you don't, they will call you racist. Now, he has enough political connections that his kids will be okay, but that really was the main point.
It was a great point. And what I think is fascinating for people, why you're so popular, because you're right, spot on about the issues, but you have a different background. Like in the past, you've described yourself, right, as a classical liberal, and for many years you were viewed as being, or at least perceived to be more on the left. But now you have so many people, whether it's libertarians, conservatives, et cetera, or common sense people, they're my favorite, that feel like they're being more a little bit on the right. Or how would you describe it in your own words without anyone else saying like your progression or, who you are, what you stand for? Yeah,
I would say I love freedom. If we were looking at a hierarchy of priorities for me, at the tip of that triangle is freedom. The what's happening in Florida right now, a government that allows people, first off, governments shouldn't allow people to do anything. Governments should stay out of your life as much as possible and then do the very few needed things. But the version of freedom that is flourishing here in Florida is exactly what I'm all about. I believe in individual rights. I believe in laissez-faire economics. The government doesn't have a huge job to do with how we trade and how we, how we go through commerce together and all of those things. I believe in logic and reason, and I believe that you have a right to live as you see fit, as long as it doesn't infringe on me. And I guess in some sense, that all sounds conservative. Now, believe it or not, that was the classically liberal position. That was a position of JFK when he was a Democrat. Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the Democrat Party of today. The Democratic Party of today wants everything to be forced on everyone through a centralized government. But I can tell you this, about a decade ago when I met Don Jr. for the first time, And, I was more on the left and he was, I guess, a little more on the right. But we both grew up in New York. We had friends that were all sorts of different people and interesting things. And we hit it off, and it was like, yeah, we had some differences of opinion that I think have narrowed over the years.
Right.
But it just didn't matter because we both were like, hey, I love living in a country with different people than me. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
And that is what I would say is a wide conservative tent right now. So I would say I'm probably a little more on the libertarian side of that compared to like a, let's say a traditional Christian conservative, something like that. But we all love America, and we all understand that we can't rule it just because we wish we could, but we got to make room for as many views as possible within the law. That's it. But that has nothing to do with the Democrat Party of today. I mean, JFK is long gone. Daniel Patrick Moynihan's long gone. Ed Koch is long gone. All of the moderates. Where is a moderate Democrat? They don't exist. Even if you took a topic like abortion, Florida, which is now this super red state, has 15-week ban on abortion. People would say 20 years ago, every Democrat had that. That was the moderate position, meaning 3.5 months. I could even go less on that. I'm begrudgingly pro-choice myself. But the point is that the conservative of 2023 is really what, in some ways, the Democrat of, say, 30 years ago was. And the Democrats, unfortunately, are just off
shifted.
La La land.
Yeah, when Don Jr. and I was travel, the time across the country and campaigning, and he would go and give speeches, and we'd see so many people coming up that used to be Democrats because he was like, this isn't your, uncle or grandfather's Democrat Party anymore. It's completely changed. And the Conservative Party, the America First party really is the one that championed the individual rights and the freedom to spend, the money that you earn and to keep it and not give it to big government. So, it's been quite a shift, and I think that's why one of the reasons why President Trump was so popular, when he was coming out of that, 2016 election and really connecting with the hardworking men and women across the country. He got a lot of Democrats and people to vote for him. Go ahead.
Well, one of the arguments that I made during the last election, because I didn't vote for President Trump the first time. I voted for Gary Johnson. I just wasn't there yet. And I was just like, I'll vote for I can't vote for Hillary. There was no chance. I wasn't there yet on Trump, so I voted for Gary Johnson. But then obviously I was a huge supporter of President Trump the second time around. And I was at rallies and I was fighting it out in California, all that stuff. But my main argument for Trump was that he was actually defending conservatism and liberalism, which is what America's really about. Not leftism, but liberalism. And my argument for that was it was very obvious how he was defending conservatism. He was putting conservative judges on the bench. He wanted states to do as much as possible. He was trying to cut taxes. He was getting us out of war. So that all made sense. And then I argued that he was defending liberalism, too, because he was trying to defend free speech against big tech. He didn't care about the social issues in that he was the first-term president ever to be for gay marriage. So he may have his own personal beliefs. I don't know what his feelings on that personally, but as you know, I met him at Mar-a-Lago.
Absolutely.
We were with you.
We had
and
a
he couldn't have been
little
happier.
couples date, remember that?
Yeah, he couldn't have been happier
How
to
nice
meet me and
was
my
he?
husband.
Oh, yeah.
He's
great. He's very supportive. He's fantastic.
Right, but so the point was he didn't care about the social issues, and that's where America mostly is, at least the moderate part of America. So I felt he was defending liberalism and conservatism, and that was why the people that had such terrible, unhinged Trump derangement syndrome, they ended up destroying liberalism. That's why there's no good liberals anymore, because Trump came in and was basically like, hey, I'm a New York guy, I'm funny, I used to be loved by all of these people.
Used to host Saturday Night Live.
Hanging out with Rudy Giuliani while cross-dressing, like all of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't good enough for them. And what that did was it basically eliminated whatever the last liberals are. So now there's about 5 of them. I mean, there's Bill Maher, let's say, and 5 other people. But there's really no other sort of sane leftist argument anymore. And it's their own fault because Trump was the best that they were going to get.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It really is. And you see this whole progression and what's going on now. But I just want to ask you a question, because one of my favorite things to talk about is foreign policy and national security. Okay. And I know people like to hear viewpoints on that. And Biden and the Democrats and even, many establishment Republicans have essentially sent a message, and I want to talk about Ukraine, that Ukraine will get a blank check. There is a lot of strong emotion and feeling about this, probably on both sides, how it should happen, whether it should happen at all. How much should this worry the American people? And does Joe Biden really even have a coherent foreign policy doctrine?
No, well, that 100% no on that. I mean, there's nothing coherent about any of this other than we're just going to keep writing checks. I mean, we've given Ukraine about $160 billion. Rand Paul and Thomas Massie basically, and I think Mike Lee, were like, hey, could we just get some receipts on this stuff?
Sure.
Are we allowed to see, are we buying soda machines or weapons? Like, what's really going on here? And basically, we have no receipts on any of this. You know the money is going to keep rolling. And again, to get to the earlier conversation, we don't even have the money in the first place. So no, there's nothing coherent about it. And if anyone watching this honestly believes, oh, if we just gave them 4 more tanks, and if they had 3 more helicopters and a little more cash, that somehow would stem the tide of this thing or turn this thing around or stop Putin, who has nukes. At the end of the day, the guy has nukes. So if you keep ramping up war, and that's not a defense of Putin, but if you keep ramping up the opposition to the guy who has the nukes, you could end up in a lot of trouble, because if you pin him into a corner, he might use them. So that's a real issue there. As far as, you know, the I think you're referring to the letter that everybody sent Tucker about Ukraine.
Yes.
And I thought that personally, I thought that President Trump's was the cleanest and simplest and most straightforward. He basically was like, we didn't have this nonsense under me. We're not going to have it under me next time. And we should end this. That was, I thought, the cleanest. I thought Governor DeSantis's was the second best. It was a little more nuanced and longer, but I thought Trump hit it in the cleanest way. But DeSantis was also correct in that it is not a national vital interest of the United States to defend someone else's borders. We can't defend our own borders, much less anyone else's. And again, because of this blank check situation, you know, you probably saw it. Remember a couple of weeks ago when Mitch McConnell said that the #1 issue on Republican voters' minds is Ukraine. And it's like, I don't know if he knows any Republicans, because I know plenty of them and nobody thinks it's the #1 issue.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just, there's a lot of opinions on all of this, you know, with Ukraine, and people are frustrated because, you know, we feel like, and people have said, quite frankly, that Joe Biden is putting America last. President Trump always put, you know, America first. It's a very different viewpoint and ideology. You know, Charlie Kirk, other friends of ours, you know, he's very against, like, you know, continuing to fund and do all this and write a blank check to Ukraine. But, you know, I have so many people come up to me and say, Kimberly, what's going to happen with this? Like, what's going to go on? You know, and it is pretty perplexing and troubling because of who's in the White House right now. And, you know, and people are obviously acknowledging the fact that Putin and, you know, Russia is on the march. I mean, how do you see this in terms of it, you know, playing out?
Well, look, if we had our own house in order, you know, I toured with Jordan Peterson for a year and a half. One of the things that he talked about was clean your room before you clean the world. If our own house was in order
to live
here,
by.
right? It's pretty, stand up straight with your shoulders back. I started doing that too. But really, this idea of, like, you know, we don't need everything to be perfect in the United States, but right now everything is very broken, and we're governed by a bunch of people that everyone are not particularly competent, whether it's Joe Biden because of his cognitive issues, or whether it's Kamala Harris last night on Stephen Colbert. She literally could not tell Stephen what her job was as vice president. So the problem is when people look at their bank accounts and they see the inflation stuff, or you try to order a couch from Crate and Barrel, which used to take a week, but now it takes 6 months. So you see the supply chain stuff.
How much does that make you crazy? It drives me nuts. I'm like, what is happening? Did the wheels just fall off the bus that we call America? So now no one can get anything? And you're a new father, you and your husband. I mean, you got babies, and there's no baby formula, and there's no nice sofa or like baby crib because everything's back ordered. I mean, it's bananas.
No, it's nuts. Look, you guys moved to Florida right before we did, but it was in the midst of all this craziness. And try to buy a couch. Try to buy. I was literally trying to buy I think it was a 3x2 window. We were going to just cut out an area, and you literally, the guy looked at me like, he's like, what are you talking about? We can't get you a window tomorrow. He's like, it'll take 6 months. So I think the issue is that when people see all of that stuff that does not feel right, it's just wrong, and we know it's wrong. And then you just look at the people who are communicating about this. Joe Biden, you know, half the time shaking imaginary people's hands. Kamala not knowing what she does for a living. Jean-Corinne Pierre, who, you know, these diversity hires who are not good at what they do,
really bad.
who lie to us about everything. Well, then people are just like, well, wait a minute, we can't fix anything here. So how the hell are we going to fix what's going on in Ukraine? And I think that's a perfectly legitimate argument. You know, like, there are probably some people across the world that aren't happy with what's going on in the United States, but they don't get to tell us what to do.
Well, it's absolutely right. But I mean, do you feel like things are improving at all? I mean, in all honesty, like, you know, I don't know. I feel like maybe a little bit some of this backlog is finally moving along, like you can get stuff. It's still like, oh, this is delayed, or we don't have roof tiles, we can't get you those doors. But what do you think?
Well, I'm very bullish on the red states, and I'm very short, I would say, on the United States. That's very depressing. But under this administration, which is why we got a big election coming up, and whatever happens on the Republican side, it will be significantly better than the Democrats, and I hope enough people realize that. But if they don't, and we continue with the Democrat administration, the red states will figure out a way to do what they got to do. But the real issue with that is, let's just say Florida and Texas and 5 other red states are absolutely flourishing. The problem is the blue states will always want that success. Mm-hmm. California will want to fund all of its loony bill, reparation things and all that via whatever the success of Florida and Texas and Montana and Tennessee are. So that really is the problem. There's a set of people that just want to live and let live, and there's a set of people that want to control everybody. And we're supposed to live in the United States together, and the pull and push on that is getting, ramping up, I would say.
All right, so let's talk about, obviously you're a huge media personality and everything, and just, launching, get everything going, Rumble, and Don Jr. and I follow, which I'm super excited about. But I'll tell you, you're a big personality out there. You're very active on Twitter, on everything. People are paying attention to what you're saying, Dave. And I get a lot lot of questions because I'm always, here it's coming, here it's coming.
Ask me the hardest question you got.
Don't pretend you've got an audio problem, okay?
Hey, what now?
What?
Sorry,
Say
my
again?
earpiece.
Can't hear you. So people come to me and they're like, oh, you love Dave Rubin. What's going on? Does he not like Trump? Is he just for DeSantis? He's hitting these people. You're in these little Twitter boxing wars.
Yeah.
And well, it is pretty wildly entertaining. But I mean, I want to know, what's the deal? Are you for my future father-in-law or for DeSantis? What the hell's happening?
All right. First off, I am 100% happy to answer this question, and I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that when I finish answering this, even if we don't see totally eye to eye on it, that we're good. Yeah, and I know I would still be, and I know I would still be good.
That's why Rumble's good. You
Junior.
get all the different opinions. Yeah.
Exactly. So look,
lay it out for me.
I'm hugely appreciative to Governor DeSantis for what he did with this state so that I had a refuge as someone fleeing California to come and live in this state, which, in essence, basically stayed open the entire time, is flourishing for all the reasons we discussed before and more. I proudly voted for Donald Trump, and as I say on my show every day, there is a good chance I will vote for Donald Trump. I think if DeSantis runs, which obviously it seems like is going to happen, the fight between them will be good. What I would like to see out of Trump is it seems to me that DeSantis, because he's in office right now, you kind of know what he's doing right now, right? You can see it on the ground happening in Florida right now.
Yes.
And I've tweeted this out, what I think President Trump is going to have to do is figure out a different line of attack that has worked on other people. Doesn't strike me as if it's going to work on DeSantis. So the nicknames, which I think there's a full-on reason that he did it and why they work and why they were necessary. What Trump needed to do in 2015 was break us all out of a slumber. So he had to do every crazy thing possible. He figured it out. And that's why I always thought that these people were, there was a certain set of people that were always like, I like what Trump's doing, but I don't like his behavior or how he tweets.
Right.
And it's like, you're telling the guy who did the thing that no one said could be done how to behave. It's crazy. You have to give him that leash to do whatever he needs. I think the difference this time is that because DeSantis is doing virtually everything that any conservative could want, that the name calling is not going to work on him. You have to figure out another line of attack. But when they get on the debate stage, it's very obvious that Trump is a more skilled debater. There's a television personality version of all of this. And look, if it ends up being, first off, I would gladly vote for Trump if he's the nominee. If DeSantis is the nominee, I'll gladly vote for him. But to me, and I think for you too, as Floridians, worst case here, or not worst case, but there's a situation where we end up with Trump in the White House and DeSantis here, or DeSantis. It's like, we're going to be okay over here, but I think there's an ability to duke this out properly without everything burning down. That what I'm going for more than anything else. Did I clean it up for you?
Pretty kind of. I mean, just very small, couple little crumbs in aisle 7 that we'll finish cleaning up here. But that was a very decent answer because people get confused. Because you were very strong, for Trump. I know you didn't vote for him initially, but people saw the results, and like you said, that DeSantis is in office right now, so we seeing what's going on and the juxtaposition between what we're seeing here in Florida versus other blue states. But we also, Trump built that, meaning he built this whole America first and limited government and lower taxation and, increasing manufacturing and jobs infrastructure here. Great, very strong, robust foreign policy and national security. So we know what's in the pudding. I mean, he's done such a phenomenal job. And what to the point if people say, well, are we better off having Trump in, somebody who actually has been in that exact position? We don't have a lot of time to waste for someone to learn and get up to speed on the job. Because no matter what, you can be a governor, you can be a senator, whatever. Once you're in the White House and you're dealing with all of that, it is a very different ballgame.
Well, Kimberly, I'll give you one that hopefully you can get to President Trump before the next time I sit down with him. And I'm going to try to sit down with all of I sat down with Nikki Haley yesterday. I sat down with DeSantis 2 weeks ago. I'm going to try to get everybody, including the president, actually, and I'll go to Mar-a-Lago and do it or wherever he wants to do it. But I'll give you one that I think if he could clean up would really help him right now. One issue that I think he has is that if he believes that the last election was stolen, which I believe he believes, and I think that more and more people are coming around to something nefarious was going on here. What he has to do is lay out the case. Well, if you believe they stole it from you last time, or as they said in the Atlantic, they fortified the election, right? If you believe that that was the case, well, then why wouldn't they do it to you again this time? So what have you done to ensure that that won't happen again? I think he needs to address that.
Right, but that's why you got to play by the same rules, especially in those pivotal states where they have, ballot harvesting, et cetera. So coming up with a robust plan to do that. He has been saying that in his speeches. But let me tell you something. That doesn't mean that they'll just, open the doors wide for, Governor DeSantis. I think they'll do it to anybody on the Republican side or any conservative, America First patriot that is going to try to aggressively run and win and take back the White House.
I totally agree with that. It's an issue for every Republican, period, because, in red states, there are voter ID laws for the most part. Florida, in our election here, even though it obviously was a landslide, the gubernatorial election, but, we had the results, in essence, 2 minutes after the polls closed, and there was no legitimate, I would say, sane person who said that there were any issues with the elections here. People know that it's fully legit here. So what do you do?
The evidence has been coming out to, really back that up.
Right. Well, because the simple truth is you go to vote here, you have to bring your ID, you take your ID, they look at you, they verify that you're you walk over with a piece of paper to the ballot box, you put it in, you take it out, someone looks at you again, you put it in the other box. It all feels very legit.
Sure.
That is in stark contrast to the last time I voted. It was against Gavin Newsom in the recall election in California, where I literally by default I went into my wallet to take out my ID, and the guy looked at me like he kind of freaked out, like whoa, where do you think we are?
Exactly.
Is it a bowling alley? You're trying to get shoes? But I think you're totally right that it's not just an issue for Trump. It's an issue for every Republican. Like, are you going to, at the end of the day, trust what happens out of Pennsylvania, or is there going to be a pipe bursting in Philadelphia again, or God knows what's going on in Arizona? So I don't think that's a Trump exclusive issue, but I think Trump should get ahead of it and say, hey, I'm running again. I think I'm the best candidate. We know the reasons why, but here's how we're going to deal with the election fraud stuff. Otherwise, we could end up in a situation just like we ended up in last time, which by 11 o'clock at night on election night, Trump was winning in all of those last 7 states.
Awful, yeah.
And I'm driving home I was at the Daily Wire studio that night with Shapiro and those guys. Yeah. I'm driving home and I'm like, yeah, Trump won. It was obvious, and this is great, and America's going to continue to be in great shape and all that stuff despite COVID or whatever. And then 6 hours later, everything was upended. So I think if he can get ahead on that, I think it'll help him a lot. But look, I totally like Trump. Personally, I think you guys are all great. I'm friends with Ivanka and Junior, obviously. These are all good people. The media has treated all of these people horribly.
Terribly.
And I will fight for anyone that fights for freedom. It's as simple as that.
That's true.
And just one other thing on this. I don't think it even matters to a certain extent. I don't even think it matters this early on, like, oh, do you like this guy more or this guy more or whatever. It's like, let this robust group of people get involved. The contrast.
Well, they did have that in 2016 where, Trump, it was like rock'em sock'em, knock him out, and Trump, knocked out like 16 great, very well qualified people. You know,
Bingo, exactly. So I think he's relishing what's going to happen now. Let him get to some, I think the other problem that maybe, not problem, but I think the other weirdness around all of this right now is that DeSantis hasn't said he's getting in yet. So the fighting seems sort of asymmetrical. Trump likes symmetrical fighting, right? Let's all get on stage and do what we got to do. So look, this is super early on. But just look at it this way. If you look at just like the 4 or 5 people that we think are running on the Republican side, so let's say it's Trump and DeSantis and
Haley.
Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley and maybe Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence. It's like whether you like or hate those people, these are professional people who have resumes and track records, and you may not like or agree on all of the stuff, but they deserve, let's say, at least to be on stage. Now compare that to what the Democrats put up last time.
That's your right here. Yeah, I agree. Just nightmare. I mean, there's nobody good for them on the other side. But I guess, to me, foreign policy, national security is so important. And President Trump, I honestly believe that we would not be seeing the situation in Ukraine if he was still in office. We certainly would have had that abysmal withdrawal from Afghanistan. So by far, I think he's the best qualified, for that. I mean, let's be honest, Ron DeSantis does not have, foreign policy experience or national security. And I think the thing that rubs Trump the wrong way is that, he helped build and create DeSantis. When he was about to lose that race, he stepped in. I know Don Jr. and I ran around fundraising, doing a bunch of events, to be able to, help him. So I think that if I can say, I think that's a little bit from where he's coming from. And, he does play by a different rubric in terms of the way how he hits people or what he does and his, politics and the way he represents himself, which a lot of the American people like because he's feisty, you want a fighter, especially with what's going on in the world right now. Like, we know that he can handle them. We know that he can handle Putin. We know that he can handle Xi and Kim Jong-un. And, the list goes on and on. So that, I think, is a very significant aspect that people focus on in his sort of toolbox of, what he can do. And he's been hitting DeSantis, but Trump's up in the polls. He really is.
On the foreign policy stuff, I 100% agree with you. This would not be happening in Ukraine if Trump was president. 100%. When he dropped that mother of all bombs, right when he got into office, people were like, what is he doing? He's going to start World War III. And no, what he did was, hey, we're going to do something crazy. And what's the signal to the world? The signal is don't mess with us. And then we had all of these peace deals in the Middle East. And we had talks with North Korea.
And all the terrorists that he
And Putin
killed.
didn't do anything regarding Ukraine, although he did stuff under Obama, and now he's doing stuff under Biden. And there was a Trump between that when everything was fine.
Yeah.
So I completely
And he was a terrorist
agree.
takeout machine. I mean, he really was. He did very well for us in that sense and to make, the country and, quite frankly, the world more safe. And I think that does matter to people. Listen, I live in Florida. I love it. I'd like DeSantis to stay here and continue doing a good job. And I think his time will come. But right now, we need like a wartime consigliere to go in and kick some major ass.
Listen, Kimberly, tell your father-in-law to be
I will tell him
that
tonight.
I will gladly sit down with him. And literally what I would do, as I said to Nikki Haley yesterday, my intention by sitting down with all of these people is to hear their ideas. I sat with Nikki. I happen to agree with Trump more on the Ukraine stuff than I do with Nikki. Mm-hmm. I said that to her. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to hide my opinions here. I think that's why what I'm doing is resonating with people because, when other network people, especially when they interview people, like Jake Tapper pretends he has no opinions or Chuck Todd pretends he has no opinions. And it's like, no, you guys are Democrats and that's okay, but be Democrats. So I don't feel the need to hide my opinion. So I said to Nikki, I happen to, sorry.
Is that Nikki calling or Ron DeSantis?
It was the DeSantis people. That's it. I'm not going any more breakfast.
Hysterical.
But I think if you're honest about what your opinions are and you are willing to talk to people and figure out what's what, I think people appreciate that. And we have a very wide tent here. And you're right. If we end up with just 4 more years of Ron DeSantis as the governor of Florida, I will be very, very happy with that outcome.
No, this is a perfect point to leave it at. We can agree on that. It's fantastic. I do enjoy when everyone sends me your tweets. I get them to my text. I was like, yes, I saw it. But it's good. They like to listen to
get a hobby,
they're like,
man.
that guy. But it's good. You keep it interesting. And I certainly appreciate, putting together Rumble and building this incredible, platform. And that's why we love Rumble, because you can have, differing viewpoints, whether it's Russell Brand or whoever on there. We want to hear the ideas and the debate and the discussion, right? We're not afraid of that. We want it back and forth. And that's what makes this country, healthy and robust, the rhetoric and being able to communicate versus canceling or censoring people like we have seen on so many of these other things. It's crazy town. But one thing's for certain, you never disappoint. I really appreciate you being here with me on the program, and I'll be doing locals later, but all the best to you, Dave, and the kiddos.
It was great seeing you. I hope you and Don are going to come down to Miami, and we can do some fun stuff. Okay,
just make sure you get a couch by then.
Well, I can't promise that, but I guess we could go out.
All right, perfect. You're the best. Thanks, Dave.
Bye-bye.
All right. All right, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors and to tell you all about Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Now, with Patriot Mobile, you put America first, my favorite thing to do, with every call that you make, all while getting the same nationwide coverage as major carriers. You get that? So when people ask me, what do you mean, like Verizon, like AT&T? Yes. And not only does Patriot Mobile provide you dependable wireless service at an affordable price, they also share your values. And we've been talking about that on this show. They actually support you. Like some of these crazy banks that don't support you, think about where you invest your money. And with Patriot Mobile, you are able to vote with your dollars and vote to support Patriot Mobile. It's as simple as that. And here's a nice little goodie, because for free activation, go to patriotmobile.com/Kimberly and you get it for free. All right? For free activation, that's patriotmobile.com/Kimberly. Mobilization of freedom and supporting you. I'm very excited about it. And we continue with our look at the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and concerns over the increased pressure on their regional banks and fears from customers over the safety of their deposits. And a new report from the New York Post says that the directors are now facing a wave of investigations into how the bank failed so much so fast. And as it turns out, some of the directors were apparently light on their banking credentials, and it was a major problem because it was a board dominated by Democrats. You see what happens? So, for example, the directors include a Hillary Clinton mega donor, an improv performer, no, I'm not kidding, and even a Pelosi-linked winemaker. How is any of this qualifying them to be on the board of a bank? I don't know. And according to the Post, only one director had any notable presence in the banking business. No wonder it failed. Is this just another example of wokeness, taking priority over merit? Because that's what it seems like. Because when you prioritize identity over qualifications, government and efficiency takes a back seat. And add that to the growing fears across the country about the economy, inflation, higher interest rates, increased financial anxiety. It's all exposing the major cracks in Joe Biden's economic policy. And seeing the turmoil in the banking sector, now more than ever, it is time to diversify your portfolio. Okay? It's why I want to tell you about Goldco. Gold and silver can protect your retirement savings from inflation and dollar devaluation. You can roll over your 401k or IRA into precious metals and safeguard your savings tax and penalty free. From precious metals IRAs to direct purchases of gold and silver, Goldco has helped thousands of Americans diversify and protect their retirement savings. Do you want to trust it to these crazy woke banks that'll lose your money? I don't think so. So support companies who support you instead of supporting woke companies who hate you. It's a very simple formula. So go to kimsmetals.com to learn more, and they'll walk you through the whole process, send you, material, anything you need to know, and they'll help you transfer it over. And that's kimsmetals.com. calm. All right. And in closing tonight, just take a moment to think about the real role of government. Protecting people, protecting prosperity, promoting prosperity. At the core, government ought to be focused on maintaining order, giving Americans the opportunity to live a stable and good quality of life. But it's these core issues that Democrats seem the least concerned with. It is not of concern to them whatsoever. Just think about it. Spiraling crime and homelessness, progressive prosecutors siding with violent criminals over innocent victims. It's one big far left nonsense cocktail designed to demoralize, denigrate, and destroy your livelihood. But the good news is, we have a Trump America First agenda, willing to stand up against it, fighting for free speech, the rule of law, strong borders, free and fair markets, and choice in education. Listen to President Trump in Iowa this week talking about combating crime. Take a look.
Cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you look at what's happening to our country. We cannot let it happen any longer. And one of the other things I'll do, because, you know, you're supposed to not be involved in that. You just have to be asked by the governor or the mayor to come in. The next time, I'm not waiting. One of the things I did was let them run it, and we're going to show how bad a job they do. Well, we did that. We don't have to wait any longer. We got to get crime out of our cities. Thank you very much for a good question. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
All right, and that's what a real leader looks like. Meeting the moment and standing up for the forgotten men and women who are being forgotten no longer thanks to President Trump. And we will be giving you a front seat to all of it, right here on Rumble, where facts and free speech come first, and where we reject the false narrative and we seek the truth. And in the meantime, be sure to follow me at Kimberly Guilfoyle here on Rumble and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And also be sure to follow me, there I am, across all platforms, Twitter, Truth Social, Facebook, and Instagram. And hop on over to locals.com. Dave Rubin was just talking about it at Kim Guilfoyle, where we will have live Q&A. And comment down below. Tell me what you think. Who do you want me to interview, and what stories and issues that you are most interested in? It's been a pleasure being with you all. Have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to hop on over to Locals now.